Dr. Derick Sandy Hulme has spent more than 3 decades helping students think critically, lead purposefully, and find their path to living a meaningful life. Since joining Alma College in 1992, he has served as the Arthur L. Russell Professor of Political Science and has become a nationally recognized leader in experiential education. Sandy directs Alma's nationally acclaimed Model United Nations program, one of the most successful in the country, as well as the college's nationally competitive scholarship program and the Posey Global Leadership Fellows program, which has enabled hundreds of students to pursue research, internships, and service opportunities around the world. Sandy received his PhD from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, and he is a respected scholar of international relations, terrorism, U.S. foreign policy, and the intersection of politics and sports. Beyond the classroom, Sandy is perhaps equally well known for an extraordinary personal accomplishment. He has run at least 1 mile every single day since March 5th, 1973, a streak spanning more than 5 decades. I'm very excited for our conversation, and it's truly an honor to have him on the show. Welcome, Sandy, and thanks for joining us on Life Excellence.
Thank you so much, Brian. You're very kind.
Sandy, you and I have known each other for years, and you know I've always been grateful for the difference you make at Alma College and for the impact that you've had not only on students, but also on faculty, staff, the Board of Trustees, on which I've had the privilege of serving, and many others in your sphere of influence. I love hearing the success stories of your students, and I can't wait to discuss the difference you make on Alma's campus and, of course, around the world. But before we jump into that, I want to ask you about something that absolutely blew me away when I first heard about it. When you were 11 years old, which coincidentally is when I started running, you began running at least 1 mile a day. Since then, you've run every single day. I think I have this right, for more than 53 years. Sandy, what sparked your initial interest in running? And how was it that you were that consistent at such an early age?
Well, my father was a high school cross-country coach, and he was very kind in letting me come to every one of his cross-country meets. And he said, if you would like, you can start 1 minute behind the JV runners. And I always remember I was a little tiny kid, and it meant so much for me to be able to be with the big boys. And so I just sort of got the bug, and I was thinking, gosh, I really love how these these high school kids are doing so well. And gee, if you want to really be good, because obviously I was way behind them, you better practice. And so I just said, you know what? I'm going to do this, and I'm going to be really serious about it. And so I just said, okay, I'm going to do this every day. And it just kind of became this habit, and it was a habit that continued and has continued throughout my life. And it's one of these things you don't really think about it, you just do it. And it's an addiction for sure. I mean, it's something that causes, a little bit of consternation among my family sometimes. You have to plan your international plane trips very carefully, because you have to kind of plan your layovers. I was flying the first time to Japan, and you had to be careful to layover in Alaska before you cross the international date line, because you would lose a day. And so there were many little challenges along the way, but it's something that has just been a part of my life, literally, since I was a little child.
Well, what a wonderful opportunity at the age of 11. So you're probably in 6th grade and having the opportunity to run with high schoolers, even though you started a minute behind them. I bet you probably passed 1 or 2 along the way. And so I can see where that would have motivated you to run. But what really astounds me is, and especially back then, that you've done it every day since then is remarkable, of course. But what's so surprising to me is that you started every day, even back in the 6th grade, or again, whatever grade you were in at the age of 11. At what point did you consciously think, I'm going to do this every day? And when did you add "for the rest of my life" to the mantra? Because that
Well, I
seems to be the case
consciously
at this point.
made that decision on March 5th of 1973, the day that this began. So this was kind of just a little obsessive thought in my head, and I just said, you know what? I'm going to see what I can do. And of course, I'm a little kid, and I think, I'm watching the Olympics, and I had just seen Frank Shorter. Frank Shorter won the Olympic marathon in 1972. I actually had the opportunity to run a workout with him when I was at St. Lawrence University as a college senior, and I was very inspired by Frank Shorter. And so I just thought, well, if Frank Shorter can do it, why can't I do it? And of course, well, I couldn't do it, but I tried. And so he was really, in a way, my inspiration. And, it's just something that truly just became a habit. And so it was nothing that became something that I had to think about every day. I just did it. And it worked out well. I mean, I didn't become an Olympic marathoner, but it certainly has helped me really in every facet of my life. And it's helped me, I think, with my students, with my college students, very much in terms of trying to help them think about certain things in particular ways, and help them understand what it makes to make a commitment, what it means to make a commitment.
Share a little bit more about that. So when you first started talking about the impact that has on students, I was thinking maybe sort of rapport building or street credibility. Hey, I'm doing this really cool thing, but it sounds different than that.
Yeah, it's different than that. I mean, it is funny. I mean, the students generally kind of know about this running streak. The president of the college had a cute little celebration 3 years ago, and he had shirts made up that said "No days off," and it had the years on the back. And there were about 50 students, and they ran downtown with me for that afternoon. And so they know about it, and they know about some of the running things that I've done. But I think what's more meaningful for them is the whole notion of, if you want to really try to be as good as you can be at whatever, then you really do have to put yourself out there. And the message always is, you shouldn't be afraid of finding out what your limits are. You should be mortified not to do that. And so you don't want to go through life thinking, what if? And I think if you reach the point where I couldn't run any faster than I had run, I ran 140 miles a week for 5 years. I was trying desperately to make the Olympic trials. I got very close. I ran 2 hours and 21 minutes and 9 seconds, and I'm running down Boylston Avenue in Boston at the end of the Boston Marathon, and I'm watching the clock, and I'm going, you're not making this. The trials qualifying time was 2 hours and 20 minutes, and I was 69 seconds short. But I've never looked back and thought, what if I had only trained harder? I literally couldn't have done anything else. And that's sort of the message that you try to help young college students appreciate, is don't be afraid to find out what you're capable of doing. Be afraid of never finding that out, because you don't get a do-over. And I think that message, to me, is what's most important. The students, they're kind of amused about the running thing, and it's a nice little story. But for them, it's really about helping them look in the mirror and come to appreciate what their possibilities are.
That's really great insight, and that's a great message. Sandy, of course, we could devote this entire episode to running, because and I'm a runner. I don't run every day. I certainly haven't run every day for the last 53 years, but your accomplishment is truly a masterpiece for me in both discipline and consistency. And I think most people admire consistency, but struggle to practice it. What's the secret to developing a meaningful habit like you have, and then doing it every day for such a long stretch of time?
I think you put your finger on the right word, and that's just habit. And that's, again, a conversation that I have all the time with my students. Good habits, bad habits. They're made, every single decision you make, for good or not, becomes habit forming. And so you're never going to be perfect. You're never going to make all the right decisions. But the more correct decisions you make, the easier it is to make the next good decision. And so it's not about suddenly turning the page and changing your life. It's about being aware that you are making decisions all the time. And when you are conscious of that, you will make more good decisions than you made before. And the more good decisions you make today will help you make better decisions tomorrow. So consistency is a product of consciousness, simply being aware that what you're doing matters. Little things are never little. The little things in life are your life. And the little things in your life add up to ultimately what you are able to accomplish, achieve, and perceive. And I think that that's really the awareness piece. Our young students are literally bombarded in the world today. They're frenetically driven to the next thing, the next scroll, the next TikTok, the next whatever. And they rarely have a time to sit back and reflect. And oftentimes I really encourage them, go in your room, close the door, turn off the lights, close your eyes, and think about what you have done. When students go on these international experiences, oftentimes they come back and they then are on to the next thing. In order to really benefit from those experiences, you have to process them. And that takes time, it takes reflection, and it takes thoughtfulness. And I think that if you can encourage students to do that, then that will help them in the process of developing those affirming life habits. And so consistency is about awareness, and it's about recognizing that little things aren't little. And I think sometimes students, they focus, and I understand why they focus on, getting into graduate school or their next, what job are they going to get? And those are all important, but those are the end products of kind of a life lived in a certain fashion.
Do you talk about the compound effect of those little things?
The compound effect is
So those habits that add up over time and the effect that it ends up having on their lives?
that's literally everything. I mean, I had a student a number of years ago. She was very bright, and she came to Alma College, and I always remember she was a young 18-year-old. She looked me in the eye and she said, Dr. Hulme, I want to be a rich corporate attorney. And she was my incoming advisee. And I said, well, you know what? We are going to make that happen. Well, she ended up joining our Model United Nations team, and she became very aware of the world. She was from a small town outside of Saginaw, Michigan, and she was not at all worldly, but she became interested in the international arena. And so we sent her after her first year at Alma to go on a small-scale agricultural development project in Tanzania. And she came back and she absolutely loved it. She had a remarkable experience. She came back and she goes, I want more of that. The next summer we sent her, she interned at the U.S. Embassy in Nigeria, picked up at the airport in an armored personnel carrier to get her to the embassy. The next fall, she spent the entire fall at the U.S. mission to the United Nations as the U.S. is getting ready to go to war against Iraq in 2002. She was in the Security Council with helping U.S. prepare briefing materials. Well, she went on to be accepted at Harvard, Stanford, and Yale Law School. She ended up going to Yale Law School, won the Yale Prize for the Outstanding International Law Student, and then ends up arguing a case before the International Court of Justice in the Netherlands on behalf of the United States. This is a little kid from outside of Saginaw, Michigan. And when you talk to her, she says, you know what? I find it hard to believe that I ended up where I was. She also won the Truman Scholarship and the Fulbright Scholarship. It was one thing at a time. And as she will tell you, and she's really nice, she comes back and talks to my current students, and she says, don't think you have to plan out your life, step by step. It will never unfold that way. You have ideas, and those ideas will change. And one experience does lead to another, but be open to the possibilities that you know exist and that you know that are out there, but you don't even know what they are. So I think that compounding idea is so important for young people, and the willingness to let go of thinking that you can control and manage and know what is going to come next, whether it's a year from now or 10 years from now.
Well, and on the other hand, controlling the things that you can control, right?
Absolutely,
So not
absolutely, and that's
not
the whole.
not trying to control.
That's the thing. You control what you can control, and you keep your window short, so that you are focusing on your current classes, not what you need to take in 2 years, and you do the best that you can with where you are at the moment. And that's sort of this whole idea of just being conscious and aware of the game in front of you. And I think that is the way to ultimately move forward.
I appreciate that. Getting back to your running streak for just one more question. I think it was Mike Tyson who said everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And I thought about that in relationship to the almost 20,000 days, I think, that you've been running continuously. I'm sure you've had hundreds or probably thousands of days that went really, really smoothly. You had great weather, optimal health, high motivation to run. You jumped out of bed, right into your shoes, and ran out the door. But as you know, Sandy, our resolve gets tested under the most adverse conditions, not the smooth conditions. You live in Michigan, as do I, and so you face freezing temperatures in the winter, hot temperatures in the summer, like it is here today. You've traveled extensively, and you mentioned this earlier, which poses a unique set of challenges, especially if you're crossing the international date line. I actually remember reading one student's account of you running around an airport in Europe during a stopover on the way to India. So you were really managing this very, very closely. And by the way, I'm guessing that in the 53 years that you've been doing this, you've been ill or a little bit under the weather at least once or twice. And then also you even completed one daily run after a hernia operation that same day. How have you navigated through the challenges and obstacles you faced? Because there's a bigger lesson. This really isn't about you and the running, and I'm sure you've caught on to that. What's the important lesson or advice that you have to share around discipline and consistency, which we've been talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The hernia thing was rather testy. So, I mean, that one, I was getting a hernia operation in the afternoon, and so I ran in the morning, and then the operation was fine, and I came home, and boy, did that not feel very good. And so you have to run in the course of a calendar day. You have to get in your run, and so I waited until the next day, and my wife kind of went along next to me in case I fell over or something. But it took me well north of a half an hour to run that mile, but I did, and it's one of those things where, in a way, it's probably silly to do it, but it never occurred to me not to do it, and so the weather thing is a non-issue. I did this relay across the country. We went from Santa Monica, California to Annapolis, Maryland, and we broke the world record. We did it in 12 days, 1 hour and 36 minutes. It was fantastic. We had 12 people running 2-mile legs, and we ran across the desert. It was 115 degrees. That was really hard. So weather is not kind of a real problem, but when you have something like an operation like that, that's a real challenge. And so I suppose there will be there certainly could be certain times where it literally is physically impossible to do something, but in my mind, as long as it is kind of humanly possible to do it, it never occurs to me not to make that effort. And I think that I talk to my students, and people get caught up in the daily issues, and my cell phone is not as fast as it needs to be, blah blah blah. And I always tell them, go watch the Band of Brothers, And think about being a 19-year-old invading the beaches, at Normandy, and have a little perspective taking. And so for me, the running piece is always a little perspective taking. I'm not 19, going to near certain death at Normandy, but I can sort of make my effort, and it's what I can do to say, you know what, I'm going to make an effort, even though it's kind of a silly, I understand it's kind of a silly little thing. And in the grand scheme of things, it wouldn't matter whether I ran or didn't run or whatever. But to me, it does matter. And so I try to encourage, especially my young students, to care desperately about something, and it doesn't matter what that something is, but it's one of these things, little mantras. If you can't care about something, you don't have to know what it is, but you better be able to care. And if you can't, it's really a big you problem, and you've got to figure that out, because that's your life. And you only get, as they say, you only get to go around one time, and so you better cultivate that sense of appreciation, and that's just about caring.
Sandy, you grew up in Rochester, New York, and later pursued graduate studies, both your master's and PhD, in the Boston area. How did you end up at Alma College?
Well, college teaching jobs are hard to come by. And I was very fortunate to have a number of different offers. And I came out to Alma to interview, and I sensed possibility. I sensed a college that wanted to say yes, that didn't know necessarily exactly what the yes was going to be about. And I thought I had something to contribute in a small school. I had gone to a school a little bit bigger than Alma, but I very much appreciated the small liberal arts college. And the school has been such a blessing, most certainly to me, because it has given me the bandwidth to be able to explore interesting ideas. I just got back from the Faroe Islands and Iceland, and I got thinking this past winter that the Arctic is truly the next great frontier of global competition and hopefully global cooperation. And if our Model UN students wanted to be in the game and really be aware of and able to make a contribution to this emerging set of concerns, they better actually know what's going on. So we took a group of students to a conference sponsored by the Arctic Council. It was in the Faroe Islands, this incredibly remote, beautiful place. And we were there for 3 days. And then we went to Iceland and saw one of the biggest geothermal plants in the world. But the idea was, let's get out there and engage with the world in the most meaningful of ways. And so, we're looking for those kinds of opportunities, and the college has always been extremely supportive of enabling that to happen. And I'm very, very thankful and enormously indebted to extremely loyal and generous alums who have provided the financial resources to enable us to pursue those kinds of opportunities.
Well, you mentioned how fortunate you were to end up in Alma, Michigan. And I just want to say how fortunate we, the Alma community, have been for a number of years since your arrival. So we appreciate you very much for that. You arrived on Alma's campus and quickly established yourself as an innovative leader in experiential learning. And you mentioned Model UN. Let's start there. For 29 consecutive years, Alma College has received the Outstanding Delegation Award, which is the highest award at the National Model UN Conference held in New York every year. Alma's teams have also won, and I hope I have this right, 62 Outstanding Delegation Awards since 1995, which is the most in the 99-year history of the conference. So Alma College has been pretty successful at the Model UN conference. I think that's fair to say. Sandy, what separates consistently elite Model UN teams from other teams? And help us to understand the significance of that level of success, because it really is quite remarkable.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I literally knew nothing about Model UN when I got here, and one of the students came up and said, "Oh yeah, we heard about this Model UN thing, and would you be willing to be the advisor?" So we just started, and we've kind of learned very much together over the last 34 years. But what I've come to appreciate is that young students, 18 and 19 and 20-year-olds, are so consistently undervalued, underappreciated, and not looked to for the type of leadership that they're able to provide right now. And they're told all too often to wait. And our message has become one of living with a sense of urgency now. So, what Model UN basically is an opportunity for young students to engage with every single significant global issue before the world today. So, whether students are interested in women, children, the environment, weapons of mass destruction, trade, terrorism, climate change, it doesn't matter. We have 37 students. We have the largest Model UN team in the world. We also have the most diverse team in the world. We had 17 students from 11 different countries on 4 continents on our team this past year. And what unites them is a collective commitment to mattering now. So these students work incredibly hard the entire semester. It's very much like being on the academic basketball team. They're all pulling in the same direction. We have students from every single part of the campus. We have pre-law, pre-med, pre-vet, business, physicists, dancers, literally from every facet of campus life. And they're united by a desire and a recognition that they actually can make a difference now. So they represent countries very different from the United States. We always represent an African country, a Latin American country, an Asian country. So they see the world through very different eyes. They go to New York and they compete at the largest college Model UN conference in the world. There are 5,000 students from 150 countries, and they work like crazy. I mean, they work from 6:30 in the morning until 2 in the morning, and they do it for 4 days. And at the end of those 4 days, they have come up with actual, real recommendations that are then forwarded to some of those UN bodies. Last year, they went to the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. So this is an opportunity for 18 and 19 and 20-year-olds to have their voices heard, and for the UN to actually think about things that they are thinking about. And what's wonderful is that these students are not stuck. They're not being told all the reasons why things can't happen. They are realizing you can't wish away climate change. It's coming at us, and they're going to be living with the consequences for the next 70 or 80 years. And so they are committed to figuring out how to say yes, yes to making things happen. They're not stuck with no. So we always talk about, the two types of people in the world, the people who love to and know how to tell you no, all the reasons why you can't do something. Our message is let's live with those people who want to say yes. Everything is not possible, but let's try to figure out what is. And so these kids feel like it's a competition, absolutely. And I'm always thrilled. Obviously, I'm a very competitive person, and I love to see them recognized for their hard work. But we don't go to New York for that. We go to New York to help these students realize that they both can matter now and they must matter now. And that message is so important for young people to hear because, again, too often the message is you wait until you figured it out. We want them to be figuring it out now.
You have so many wonderful success stories. We could talk for hours as you shared stories of students who have gone on to do absolutely remarkable things and in fact, to have done remarkable things while still at Alma College. Sandy, can you share a story of a student that has gone on to work in the area that they discussed in the Model UN conference, or maybe a story where a student has related back to their experience as a model UN delegate and credited that experience for the success that they had later on in life?
Well, we have had so many students who have really pursued, and it's always interesting because you have the students. I was talking about the student who had argued a case before the International Court of Justice, and I went to her wedding, and this was a number of years ago, and I was sitting next to a very good friend of hers, who'd been on the Model UN team as well, and she said, "Oh, I feel like I'm just such a loser compared to this girl," and I said to her. Tell me what you're doing right now. And she was working for a small nonprofit helping homeless children in Detroit. And I said to you, are you loving what you're doing? She says, oh, I really do. I said, you know what? You're living your meaningful life. And it is just as important as your dear friend. But one young woman, I'll never forget her. She's truly a remarkable person in every way. Her name is Svetlana, and Svetlana came from the Ukraine. She was an exchange student here in high school, and she ended up staying here in the U.S. And her father had lost everything in Ukraine after he had owned a restaurant, and when the Soviet Union fell apart and the kind of mafia took over parts of the Ukrainian economy, he kind of lost everything. And so her family had no money. There was a very generous local doctor who took her in, and the college gave her a full tuition scholarship, and she stayed here. And she became very interested. She joined the Model UN, and she became interested in the plight of disadvantaged children. And she hadn't had any real understanding of these of orphans in her own country of Ukraine. And she learned about it through Model UN, and she started something called the Forgotten Children of Eastern Europe. And that was 22 years ago. And we subsequently sent, until the Ukrainian war broke out a number of years ago, we sent 2 or 3 of our students every year to an orphanage in Ukraine that we supported and still support, even in the midst of the war. But Svetlana went on to win the Gates Cambridge Scholarship, one of the most prestigious scholarships in the world. It was founded by Bill Gates in 2000. It's the Cambridge equivalent of the Rhodes. And she got her PhD at Cambridge and became a professor in Brussels, but most recently ended up with, it's an incredible kind of story, but she is NATO's humanitarian emissary to Ukraine. So you talk about kind of the full circle. She lives in Brussels. She has Ukrainian refugees living in her house. She's married, has a wonderful husband and 2 children. At the same time, she works like crazy with kind of all the officials in NATO, trying to facilitate assistance to Ukraine. So this is somebody who's been in the trenches truly, the last several years, but somebody who has never, ever forgotten the blessings that she has had along the way and the enormous support that the college gave her. She went to Harvard in the summer for two years to the Ukrainian Institute at Harvard, and that was facilitated by folks at Alma, this lovely local doctor who helped her and took her in effectively. And so Svetlana has truly lived a life of gratefulness, and one where she is always sort of reaching back and trying to figure out how to continue to make things happen. And I'm in communication with Svetlana very consistently, and we're trying to help these orphans who are living currently in this orphanage that we support right now. And so I think she's a really good case study of somebody who found a passion, not just any passion, but well, I guess her passion to really make a difference to the most vulnerable folks in society, wherever that society happens to be, and then just not just caring, but doing something about it. This is not life is not a passive exercise, and I think we talk about living urgently. We don't want you just observing urgently. We want you doing something urgently. And I think she's a wonderful example of that.
Well, she certainly is, and she's one of many. In the Alma's nationally competitive fellowship program, there have been, I think, close to 60 national competitive scholarship winners who have won some $2.4 million since 2001. You mentioned the Gates Cambridge Award. There have been Marshall Award, Fulbright, Truman, Udall scholarship winners, all coming out of Alma College and under your tutelage, which is a great testament to the work that you're doing. And it's a wonderful success story for Alma College, too. Sandy, what's the change that occurs in a student's life when they realize that they're capable of doing something like what Svetlana did or what the young woman did in Detroit? And why has mentoring students through that process become such an important part of your life's work?
Yeah, those were all very interesting and important questions. And I'm just thinking back to when I met one of the 95 doctors in the entire country of Sierra Leone. And I met him in 2010, and he came to a local Rotary Club meeting in Alma. And we had a conversation, and he was working at a hospital that served 30,000 patients a year, and there were two doctors. And Sierra Leone was one of the poorest countries, and still is, in the world. And we realized that there was a tremendous opportunity for Alma students to go to a place that they would otherwise never experience in any fashion whatsoever, and that would change their lives in the most meaningful of ways. And so we began in 2010 to send what has now become about 130 students have gone to Sierra Leone over the last 16 years, which is really quite remarkable. These students have volunteered at a hospital. They've worked at an under fives clinic, and that under fives clinic serves young children with an upper arm circumference of under 10 centimeters. And these are students or children who are literally on the verge of dying. And our students have been there to help them, and most of them do survive. Some of them don't. And when they don't, our young 18 and 19 and 20-year-olds are the only people there for the mothers at the most disastrous moment of their life. And they usually don't speak the same language, but they're present. And learning and having the opportunity to be present in that moment is something they will never forget, and they will never see the world in the same way. And it is for that reason that I am so eternally grateful for the folks who gave the money, this endowed account that has enabled this program to happen. One of the very first people that went to Sierra Leone met a young fellow. He was 15 years old. He had fallen out of a mango tree picking fruit for his mother. It was just he and his mom. He got a compound fracture of his arm. His mother wrapped a dead chicken around his arm as a way to treat it. 2 weeks later, his arm was amputated because it had gangrene. Our young 18-year-old woman found out that it was possible to buy a prosthetic arm for $150. She got in touch with me and said, "What should I do?" And I said, "You need to buy that arm immediately." On my refrigerator right now, I have a picture of Abdoulaye Sesse smiling the broadest smile you can imagine with his new arm. And if he didn't have that arm, he would live in a camp for amputees. He would never go to school. He would never have a job. On the day that this young woman was leaving Sierra Leone, she looks out her window and sees a woman walking a scrawny chicken on a leash across the courtyard. The scrawny chicken on a leash was the thank you for Abdoulaye Sesse's arm. So the young woman gave the chicken to the cook, who took it home, and they had a nice dinner with his 3 kids. But that was a moment. Coming out of that, she created something called Arms Around Sierra Leone, which is a 501c3, which has provided over 300 prosthetic arms and legs to folks from age 5 to 70 in Sierra Leone over the last 15 years. So she immediately lived that meaningful life. And subsequent to that, we found out after the Ebola pandemic in 2014, 15, 16 in Sierra Leone, 15 of the hospital workers at that hospital died treating Ebola patients. My students immediately set to work and led the charge, and we raised $110,000, and we built the Mankankisa Children's Center, which opened in June of 2018. We now house 39 Ebola orphans who now have opportunity to learn tailoring, woodworking. We have a 10-acre sustainable farming operation. So our students understand they have the ability to matter now. And that's where I'm so thankful for the donor, but for the college as well, for understanding that we need our students to be out in the world doing something that matters. And we need to make that happen. And we have.
I appreciate you sharing that story. And I'm just thinking about a time I was in Zambia traveling with a small group of people, and I knew this was going to happen, that we were going to meet with parents who had just lost their son, young son. He was about 6 years old. And I was preparing myself mentally for that as we were getting ready to leave and drive and meet them and greet them and be with them. He had passed away from malaria, and we had visited a couple clinics where we saw young children dying, and like you explained, the mom there or the parents there going through that and really not having the kind of support that we have in the first world around that. And so I was preparing for that mentally, and as I was getting in the car, the leader of our group came up to me and said, and as was often the case, we would meet with either a group or with a couple, and we would sit across from each other, and we'd have one representative who was sort of the spokesperson. And the leader of our group just tapped me on the shoulder as I was getting into the car and said, I'd like you to talk to them. When we get there, I'd like you to be the spokesperson. And I'm thinking, I'm not even sure I can keep it together being in the same space with those two people, let alone having anything important to say, anything that would be helpful or add value or console them at a time that I can't imagine the feelings that they were having. So I can really relate to a lot of the stories that you've shared. And what I was thinking about as you were talking was how exposing students to different cultures changes their worldview. And so let's take it down a notch. You've talked about students who are achieving things that are just far surpass what our listeners and viewers, most of us, will ever even come close to experiencing. But what I also know is that all students who are exposed to different cultures, all people who are exposed to different cultures can't help but have their worldview altered. Whatever the experience, it could be a vacation and simply traveling around and being exposed to different foods, being exposed to different people, just seeing how other people live. And by the way, a lot of the kids who are doing that under your mentorship, under your tutelage, under your guidance, are coming from say rural areas in Michigan, or you mentioned Saginaw. I'm actually from Saginaw. So I had no context for any of that prior to studying abroad when I was in college, prior to some of the mission trips that I've been so privileged to take. Tell us why that's so important, why that exposure to cultures that are different than ours are important, and how our perspective changes. And again, not for the people who end up going on to achieve, Gandhi level greatness, arguably Mother Teresa level greatness, but just people who come back to Michigan or the Midwest, or come back to the U.S. and assimilate back into something that may have been similar to what they were doing before, but it's very different they're very different than how they were before.
It's funny the way you put that, because when we get together in the spring to choose the students who are going to travel through this program, we now have the ability, the financial resources to support every student who has a good idea. I'm of the mindset that it almost doesn't matter why they want to go to a place like Sierra Leone. It just matters that they do want to go. I think of a young fellow very early on in the program, and he joined Model UN, and he came from Flint. His father had been very ill for a long time, and he wanted to be a doctor. And he joined Model UN. In the first year, he was on the World Health Organization committee, and he was dealing with HIV and AIDS. And it just really kind of spoke to him. There was this catastrophic problem. This is about 20 years or so ago. And so AIDS was kind of at the forefront of people's minds. And so he was 18 years old, and he goes, I read about it, I kind of get it, but I don't get it. And so we sent him to Cape Town, South Africa. He spent 4 weeks at a HIV/AIDS hospice and clinic. And I'll never forget him coming back that summer, and he came over to my house, and he was telling me, and he said, Dr. Hulme, the first time I walked into the clinic the very first day, and the nurse gave me a tin cup with some water in it and said, could you go next door and give this woman a drink? And he said, I walked next door and I saw a human skeleton. Her name was Sis Nono. She was dying from AIDS. She was 42 years old. Her husband had already died. She had four young kids. And she couldn't move. He propped her up, gave her a sip of water, carried her to the next door room to be treated. The next day he came back and she had died. And that was his experience for 4 weeks. And he came back and he said, I can't just be a doctor anymore. I have to figure out a path for me that will make a bigger difference. We sent him the next year to Arusha, Tanzania. He provided home health care to people living on the street in cardboard shacks who had HIV. He ended up going to the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, one of the finest public health programs in the world. He came back to the US and he ended up getting his medical degree. But his entire world outlook changed, because what had been an abstract interest became a concrete passion. And that concrete passion was directly a function of experiencing an issue in a way that otherwise he never would have been able to do that. And it doesn't mean that he necessarily had to go to South Africa to do that. You could have gone to any number of places in the United States and had something kind of like that, not exactly the same, but it was the experience. And that's why the whole notion of experiential learning is so attractive in terms of producing transformational change in young people. It is a way to connect them, to make that bridge between the abstract and the real meaningful. And I think if we're able to do that, and that's why Model UN is such a addictive in a very positive way, sort of passion of students. They love it because they are beginning to get a sense of something that really matters. And for students nowadays who have so, in many ways, so little opportunity to communicate with each other. I mean, they'll sit next to each other and they'll text each other, but they won't talk to each other. And Model UN is about 15 hours of nonstop talking a day for 4 days. And when students are liberated from their cell phones and their screens and so on, they find they love to talk to each other and they love to hear about what each other is thinking. And so it is that experience that, in many ways, technology has separated students from, that we're trying to bring back together. We're trying to bring the students to a world that actually exists, not a world on screens, but a world that is present. And so, in so many ways, what our mission is to create students who are present to the world in which they live.
Well, I love that you're committed to that. And I love the experiential learning part. I love the last part of what you talked about, which is getting back to this world, this tangible world in which we live, and the world in which we can truly make a difference. Sandy, at some point, your job at Alma shifted, and this happened early on, shifted from teaching political science, which is noble, of course, to changing the trajectory of students' lives to experiential learning, as you described it. Was there a particular moment when you realized that happened? And what does it mean to you to have such a profound impact on the students you work with, to be able to come on a show like this or to have conversations with anybody and to be able to share the success stories of the students that you've guided and mentored and nurtured and supported and inspired?
Well, I would flip that around and I would say the impact that the students have had on me, because that has been truly my blessing, is to be able to work with students so closely. And I guess that's what I really appreciate. And I teach sort of traditional international relations classes, and those are important, and they give students a foundation to make sense of the world in a meaningful way. But I guess I began to appreciate the possibilities of something like Model UN when we first went to the National Model UN Conference in 1995. And I began to look at students coming from all over the world, and I saw the just visceral excitement that these students had in being with each other and perceiving that they had a chance to matter. And so I always think about it, I kind of hopped on the back of my students for the ride. And it's been a remarkable ride. And it's been very much a partnership. We have a Model UN guide, and it's literally a how-to, from how do you prepare to how do you create a brand for yourself at a conference, what do you wear, to literally kind of everything you can imagine. It's now 55 pages long, and that 55-page document is 90% produced by the students. It's their insights and their thoughts and their perspectives over 34 years. And so I think when you have the kind of privilege to be able to work with young students who want to matter, and you have the resources to help them matter, and you're open to working in a very collaborative way. And I really do think of us as a team. And we don't have captains, we don't have anything. We're just all in it together. I think that for me has been the key to the success of our organization. And it's really very early on, so maybe 2 or 3 years into my being here, I began to appreciate that. And it took a little while to develop the resources that we would need to expand in ways that we have, and to grow the team. We started with 10 students, and we now have anywhere from 37 to 40, 42 in a year. So it's gotten very very large. We always have an end of the season party at my house. My house is exactly the same size as it was when we had 10 students. As we've got 40 students. The first year, I mean, my kids were like 2 and 4 years old. They made the college kids play Twister, and we all played Twister together. We don't do that anymore, but so it's grown over time. But I think kind of the philosophy is one that kind of took root pretty early on. And I think that has been a philosophy that has been a guiding force for us. And in many ways now, it's sort of, for me, it's been so wonderful having so many students out there in the world. And I get emails virtually every day from students, whether they graduated 2 years ago or 32 years ago. And that's kind of, again, a blessing for me.
Well, you mentioned partnership, and I do think you're downplaying the role you've played in that partnership, but it has been wonderful in any case. And I always enjoy hearing the great success stories that come out of Alma College. Small Alma College in mid-Michigan, and I'm so proud of the impact that we get to make collectively in the world. Sandy, as you know, our show is called Life Excellence. After 50 years of daily discipline as a runner, 53 plus 53 that you've been running every single day, 3 decades of teaching and thousands of students, literally thousands of students whose lives you've influenced. What does excellence mean to you?
Excellence means leaving nothing on the table. As you are contemplating the end, it means having no what ifs that is running through your mind. And I think everybody's excellence is their own, but it is a product of not being afraid of figuring out what you are actually capable of achieving and making an absolute commitment to doing it and leaving yourself no way out. Burn the appropriate bridges behind you. Don't go into things, any enterprise, with a ready-made excuse for not performing, doing, committing your very best to whatever that happens to be. And if you do that, then you will have found your own excellence. And that's, everybody's excellence is different. And that's absolutely fine. And we really do preach that so much, that it is finding your path to living a meaningful life. It is nobody else's. It's not your parents. It's not your friends. It's yours. And you know in your heart of hearts whether you are pursuing that path or not. And so to me, that's what excellence is all about. And it seems I'm always delighted to see students pursuing their own paths, and it's been a privilege. I just today I got a wonderful little email. It was from a student who she was wonderful young woman, and she ended up going to Cambridge. She got her master's, she got her PhD at the University of Edinburgh. She's now a professor, and she sent me a picture. She just had her second child last month, and she has a little girl and a little boy, and she's doing really well. And she graduated 10 or 15 years ago, and just touching base and seeing how things are going. And she's living her life of excellence. And that's all any of us can do.
Sandy, you've been such a blessing to me through the years of our friendship, and I appreciate everything you've done for me personally, and also appreciate everything that you've done for Alma College, for everybody in your sphere of influence and in the world. Thank you so much for our time together today. It's great to see you as always, and I appreciate you taking time to join me today.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's been a pleasure, and thank you for your many kind words.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for tuning into Life Excellence. Please support the show by subscribing, sharing it with others, posting about today's show with Dr. Derick Hulme on social media, and leaving a rating and review. You can also learn more about me at brianbartes.com. Until next time, dream big dreams and make each day your masterpiece.